So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Suzanne, Gerard, please take a seat, and Sam, Kate, and Tess. Hi, thank you so much for being here. Let's have another welcome for you. Okay, so it's quite a loud mic. We might not need them, but we'll see how we go. Looking at the three of you, it's quite obvious that you've grown up a lot since what we saw in the film. So first of all, actually, when was this?
We went into the bush in the fall of 2010 and came out in June 2011. So the kids are all 6+ years older now. Tess, the young one, is now 11. Kate is now 14, and Sam just turned 17 in Scotland.
Happy birthday.
And yeah, so I think that speaks to a couple of things. One is that when we came out of the bush, I had more than 500 hours of footage, and it took 3 years to edit that down into 90 minutes. And the film, therefore, didn't premiere till the fall of 2014. And then it's been doing traveling around the world ever since.
I'd really like to come back to a bit more about the editing process, those 500 hours. But we leave you just drifting towards Dawson. And so I wanted to start by asking what happened next? What was the transition like for all of you? Back into, I'm going to say, real life in inverted commas.
Yeah, I'll maybe let everybody speak.
Yeah, if it's okay, pass the mics around.
Maybe I'll speak last instead of first.
I'd say that, I don't know, like, coming back at first was definitely hard. I feel we were not quite ready to leave the bush, so it was hard that way as well. I mean, like, the first few weeks were pretty cool because it was like, oh, we're back in Dawson, and yay, but then after that, it kind of sets in that it's not as great as it's all put out to be. So, yeah, it wasn't that great right away, but, of course, in 6 years, we've kind of adjusted.
I didn't find coming back to Dawson that bad, but immediately afterwards, we quickly went to Victoria, which is, if any of you know, a larger city down south in Canada. And that was definitely an adjustment, because we went from a tiny little cabin in the middle of nowhere to a pretty big city. And yeah, I remember me and Kate, we went out exploring with our bicycles, and we got lost the first day. And it was just a series of adjustments from there. But all in all, I think we were pretty adaptable. It wasn't too much of a problem.
And Tess?
I don't think it was that difficult, like Sam said. Going into Victoria was definitely more difficult, but when we were in Dawson, as soon as we got back, I didn't actually find it that bad. It was still quite cool, and I was still, like, I don't know, relishing in all the things that we didn't have in the bush.
Well, I think we went to the bush to try to escape the urgency of time, and I think we were pretty well fully immersed back in scheduling and so on in the city. In fact, the kids were in 3 different schools there, and we were sort of on a bent of transporting them everywhere by bicycle and trying not to drive. And so one parent would be going in one direction and another in the other, and I was still working part-time in Dawson. Back and forth, so it was really quite hectic, and I particularly felt really driven by the clock, and I don't really think it gave proper fermentation time that I was expecting or wanting.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing was getting used to being scheduled by time again. So I can remember coming back from the bush, and the kids would be doing something they were happy doing, and I'd have to say, well, you have to stop because it's 6 o'clock, you have to go to soccer practice. And that seemed very bizarre all of a sudden. And the other thing that surprised me was because we'd been so close and all under one roof and in sleeping on this kind of big family bed scenario, it also felt really odd to go back to a house where everybody went behind closed doors to their own separate rooms. that just felt very strange.
And yeah, even if things changed very quickly when you got back to town, were there things that stayed with you individually and as a family? What was the kind of lasting effect?
Yes, definitely. I mean, for me, I'm way more able to be present in the moment now. I was, before the bush, a person who was quite driven by the time. I refused to wear a watch ever since, just because I don't want to go back there. I also refuse to own a cell phone, because I know that I will then just become a slave to the cell phone, and it will take me out of being in the moment. So, you know, those are two things that have been big changes. And even though I get busy and distracted now again, like I did before the bush, I think I find it easier to put that aside for periods of time and actually hang out with my friends or my family or just myself. Whereas before, if I tried to, my head would always be full of a million other things on my to-do list.
Do you guys feel that anything stayed with you from the experience?
I think the one main thing that stayed with me is just obviously to spend time with your family, but then also to cherish your free time and to figure things out to do in it rather than just being bored through that time. I feel even now we really try not to overschedule ourselves, so because we really want that time where we just can do whatever or hang out with our family or create something or just go outside, which is, yeah, probably the main thing that stuck with me.
Yeah, I agree with Kate and with Mom. I definitely find it a lot easier to kind of find that mental space now after the bush and sort of calm down and relax and just be with my family. But also, being in the bush really forces you to be creative and make your own entertainment out of what you have around you and just improvise in general. So I definitely have more of that skill, I think, now after the bush than I did before.
Yeah, I agree with Kate and Sam and Mom, but I know that I took some things from the bush, but also I was so young before the bush that I'm not sure how much actually changed. Not sure whether it would have been the same. Yeah.
That's such a good point. Okay, Suzanne, you said in your introduction that your I'm going to hold that a bit further away. Your primary goal wasn't to make the film, obviously, but at what point was it that you decided you were going to film this? Because obviously it was quite a big decision.
I think maybe about 4 to 6 weeks before we left, I decided that I would film it. I mean, you know, the idea of documenting it seemed like a good thing to do, and I guess because I had been making short films before that, the concept of documenting it with a camera rather than with a journal seemed to make some sense to me. But it was one of the trickiest things. I actually, in retrospect, I'm not sure how I pulled it off, because it was really important that the film, The Time in the Bush, did not become a film project. And the whole idea of going in the bush was to get away from distractions. So it was, you know, kind of a crazy fine line to walk where you were, on one hand, you were documenting the experience, on the other hand, you still wanted to live the experience and not be distracted by filming it. So honestly, 9 months is a really long time, and even though I had 500 plus hours of footage, there was a ton of time where the camera never came out. And so there were lots of days and periods of time where there was no camera present, and yeah.
So tell us a bit more about this, the whole editing process, because I think it's difficult for any filmmaker to edit a film that they're also part of, because you're wearing two hats, but you've got your entire family involved in that as well. What was your approach?
Well, I think because it took 3 years, I'm not sure I had a really great approach, but I mean, it was important to bring objective eyes into the process after a while. Obviously, I had to look through all that footage fortunately for me, a good amount of the footage was just no good, so that made it cut that out right away. But yeah, it was really important to bring in other eyes who could be objective. As you say, when it's your own story, when it's your own family, it's very hard to be objective. And any filmmaker will tell you get so close to the footage, it's hard to be objective. But in this case, extra hard. So I did bring in, some story consultants and story editors to help me figure out what were the parts to keep, what were the parts that could go away.
And just before I open it up to take audience questions, I wanted to ask the rest of the family what it was like for you when you saw the film for the first time. Or maybe you were all involved in the editing process, I don't know. Either way, how does this reflect what you thought the experience of being in the bush was like, if it's not too far in the past to remember?
It was quite interesting actually, because we had seen different cuts of the film through different times. Not too many. I think we saw 2 other cuts before this one, probably around that. But once we saw it, it was kind of like, oh yeah, like this is cool. I remember kind of, even though it was us being intrigued with the film and kind of being surprised by that. But I'd also say that one of the most surprising things for me with this film is the audience's reaction every time. I never expected it to be as big as it is or popular at all. I always kind of expected it just to be a family film that maybe would go to some relatives. Nothing this big.
I think it's really interesting because we were like semi-involved, as Kate said, with a couple of the initial cuts, and I think you gave it to us for a Christmas present initially, right? One of the cuts, yeah.
A mini version.
A mini version, yeah. But I think it's quite interesting because when I look back at my memories of the bush, most of them, like there's very few of them that aren't shown in the film. So I think that the film plays probably a huge role in actually me remembering a lot of the finer details. And I only have a few select memories that aren't actually in there, which is really interesting.
Like as Sam said, when we first saw it as a Christmas present, it was like, oh, this is interesting. And then we thought this will probably be like going to our relatives. It's a good film, but I never thought it would be like this. And we saw a bit of it, like a few clips of the film, of different cuts and of the final product. But we didn't see the whole thing until a while after.
What about you?
Well, I know that I was involved, of course, as well, but in fact, I'm still waiting for the horror film to come out. I think Suzanne has enough footage that she could have a comedy and a horror piece. And, unfortunately, there were a lot of good stories and good footage, I think, that ended up on the cutting floor. Partly maybe because some of it was out of focus and the voice wasn't matching, or there was no way to have a story around a partial cut, and you can't make a movie without a good combination of both the story and the footage. But I think we were pleased at the response more than anything, and the way it's impacted a number of people. We've heard many anecdotes of people's lives having been altered, even in a small way sometimes, by observing the film. And to me, that's the most important thing.
And that sounds like a good time to open it up to the audience and see if anybody here has any questions for anyone in the family. Yeah, there's a question just at the back and there's a microphone coming to you.
Well, I love the film, thank you. But just following on from what you just said, is that what you meant at the end of the film? You say that you want to also be able to offer something, when you went back. Is that what you meant, that sort of inspiration and having people think about, time in their own lives? Is that what you were sort of alluding to? Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Are there other questions at the moment? Yeah, third row back.
Hi, thank you for the film. It's really great. I just have a technical question. How did you manage to power the camera for 500 hours plus? And the audio that ended up on the screen I thought was brilliant. And so did you have radio mics, or how did you manage to have such good quality?
Thanks. The camera charging question first. So initially we took in 2 or 3 big boat batteries, which are like car batteries, and an inverter, and my idea was that therefore that would power the camera for 9 months. I was naive in many ways, but it really only powered the camera for about 6 to 8 weeks. So on one of Gerard's last trips to town before the river froze, he did bring back a small portable generator, and every 2 months I would fire that up to recharge the boat batteries, and then from that charge the camera batteries. But I promise that's all we used the generator for. I hated the sound of it. With the audio, yes, so we had the camera, with the camera had a good external mic. I also had some a lapel mic system. And I did interview the kids, well, the whole family, and about, I think, sort of in quarterly sections for our time in the bush, which is where a lot of that voiceover comes from. But some of the voiceover comes from another time when I had somebody in Victoria, this city that was far away from where we lived, who knew nothing about the bush, nothing about our experience or what that would be like, but the kids felt comfortable with. I had them scrub through some footage and ask the kids questions, and the kids were mic'd, and I wasn't in the room. And lots of the voiceover comes from that, and that ended up being a really great thing to do, because of course when I ask the kids about an experience and they know that I was there, they answer it in a different way compared to if you ask them. So that turned out to be quite helpful. But I think that some of those gems of voiceover really make the film. And I think the kids at those ages really just tell it as they see it and speak from the heart. They don't have a lot of filters that we develop as we get older. And so therefore they came out with some really amazing insights, I thought. So it's wonderful to have been able to capture their thoughts at that time of life.
And it's so lovely to hear all of your voices. You're all telling the story. It feels very collaborative.
As you can hear with Sam's voice, it's changed quite a bit. And actually, even that time of interviewing him in Victoria, his voice was deeper than when we were in the bush. So I did have to be careful not to put the 2 Sam voices side by side, otherwise he would notice.
Yes, in the middle, and then we'll go behind.
Thank you. Found that really, really inspiring. And as Suzanne knows, I'm hoping to do something sort of similar with my own family, which is why I brought my daughter here tonight. And I just loved it. And I just wanted to ask, did you ever, a really honest question, did you ever get times, because it just looked so romantic and happy and wonderful. I know there must have been hard times, but I have a theory that the only stress of being a mother comes from when I have to get them somewhere, or when we have to be somewhere, and I've got similar ages to when you were there, and getting them out somewhere. And does that disappear? Does that stress really disappear? Did you always, what about were they fighting? And we have these times when everybody just seems completely crazy and they're all fighting. Did you have those times still, or it didn't feel like you did?
You would like to speak before I do?
I don't think we used the words hurry up the whole time. I know that sounds unbelievable, but there was just absolutely no pressure for time. And a lot of the stressors were just dissolved away.
Yeah.
But I mean, there would have been times, and there were times, of course, that things were not entirely harmonious. We just bought that footage back from Suzanne.
Yeah, people ask that question, right? It's all the bad stuff on the cutting room floor. But really, it's not. I mean, there was I think sibling rivalry was at its least. Would you guys agree? Yeah. And I would still get irritable sometimes, especially if I had been inside for too long. And the kids would pick up on it right away, as they do, and they would just say, "Mom, go for a ski." So I'd walk out the cabin door, I'd put on my cross-country skis, I'd go for a ski for an hour, and I'd come back and everything was okay again. And I think, part of it was not having all those other pressures, which is kind of what makes it hard to balance everything and where we get irritable. And I also think, like in our life before the bush, that we tended to save our best selves for our work colleagues and our acquaintances. That's the people we put on our good face for. And it was kind of the worst part of our personalities that sometimes would come home at the end of the day when we'd let all that down and that our family would have to be the brunt of. And in the bush, it really felt like it was the best of our personalities that shone forth again. Like we had humor again, we laughed a lot, and that was a really wonderful, wonderful thing.
Was there a question just behind you?
Hello, Gerard. Where did you go to Wildman University? And is it important to pass on these skills?
My ancestors are from the south of England. In fact, we were just over there in the Devon area. And the airline of shipbuilders and so on. And they immigrated to Newfoundland. I grew up in Newfoundland, in a rural area in Newfoundland. And we've been immigrants for 200 years. So, they were all workers with their hands. My father his father was a boat builder and a logger, and my father was very much into teaching us how to paint and use our hands and use tools from a very early age. And then, as an adult, I spent half my life now living in the Yukon, or more than half, living in the Yukon, and we continue to burn wood in our house in the Yukon as our fuel source. So cutting wood and using a chainsaw and using those sorts of tools has been familiar to me for most of my life. So I didn't have to acquaint myself with any of those skills. They'd all come quite naturally. And the risk-taking as well.
There's a question here at the front. For the people at the back.
Hello, thank you very much. I also want to say my favorite books are also Little House on the Prairie. I've read them probably 100 times, so it's really cool to see. And I grew up in Northern California, so also it's really special to see that scenery and also your family dynamic. And also we actually live on a narrowboat in London, so we also use wood as our primary heat source. We're 100% solar powered, and so we try to apply these principles to our lives, but the fact is we still live and work in a city. And I'm just wondering what kind of tips or things that you carry with you when you're still having to work in a city or in a town, or, in the hectic life that we all live. What do you carry with you from your time? What can you share with us?
For me, I think the important part is just taking some time, even if it's, an hour at the end of the day or a couple of hours on the weekend, but some time when we put the cell phones and the computers somewhere else, because it's really hard to be present in the moment when something's vibrating on your hip or you've got those emails you have to check and you're trying to multitask all the time. That's for me. And also, the other thing that I really learned in the bush is just the power of being outside. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the middle of the Yukon wilderness. Here in London, you have beautiful green spaces. It can be a tree outside your window, the clouds in the sky, whatever. But just some time when you're outside in some kind of natural environment and actually paying attention to it. Like, I find that very grounding when my head is chaotic. That's what brings things back into clarity again for me. Do you guys have other thoughts?
Well, I think the question's eternal, and you know, I think from some of the things that I said even in the film or wrote about in my diary when I was there, the answers or the questions go on forever. They probably have been going on by people forever. Always will, I suspect. It's the balance of earning a living and earning a reasonable living and earning that living where you have to earn it and living by certain rules and yet trying to find a way of having simplicity at the same time. I think fundamentally we've probably evolved too quickly, and I think we're really meant to be more grounded and to move much slower in space than we do. And I think it's causing a lot of emotional chaos.
Well, I am afraid to say I haven't been checking the time while we've been talking because I was taking your lead, but it seems that actually the cinema schedule does need to run to a strict time, and so that's actually where we're going to have to wrap things up. So can I just say a huge thank you to all of you. It's so wonderful to have you here, and it's a beautiful film. Thank you for sharing it with us. So please join me in thanking Suzanne, Gerard,